Hi, everyone. Thank you guys so much for coming today. My name is Michelle Lee. I am a second-year PhD student at the Stanford AI Lab, and I'm one of the organizers of the AI Salon and today's salon moderator. To just give a little bit of background on AI Salon, AI Salon was started 4 years ago by Dr. Fei Li. It is one of the most beloved and iconic student-faculty events at the Stanford AI Lab. At AI Salon, we have had many speakers, such as Jitendra Malik, Elon Musk, Yann LeCun, and Jensen Huang. And we talk about big picture topics in AI that goes beyond just talking about code and algorithms. Today, we have 3 exceptional speakers for the salon. We have Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, we have Professor Susan Athey, and we have Professor Eric Brynjolfsson, who are here to discuss on an incredibly important and pertinent topic, AI in the future of work. But before we start our salon, we want to welcome Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, who will be introducing his book, AI Superpowers, which is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today bestseller. Dr. Kai-Fu Lee is a venture capitalist, technology executive, writer, and an artificial intelligence expert. He is the founder of Sinovation Ventures, a leading VC firm focusing on developing Chinese high-tech companies. Prior to founding Sinovation Ventures, Lee was the vice president of Google, founding president of Google China, and founding director of Microsoft Research Asia. He was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. Lee earned his PhD at CMU in 1988, where he developed one of the first continuous speech recognition system. He has authored 10 US patents and over 100 journal and conference papers, and is the author of AI Superpowers. Let's welcome Dr. Kai-Fu Lee to the stage.
Thank you. It's great to be here with such distinguished people in the audience, but I thought I would bring even someone more distinguished to say something about AI.
It's a great thing to build a better world with artificial intelligence. 人工智能正在改变世界。
I'm not sure if he came himself, he would get that much applause, but that wasn't President Trump talking. That was a speech synthesis system built using deep learning to train his voice. And it's a Chinese company called iFlyTech. So I think in one example, we see the power of machine learning and also the progress that China has made. So most of you probably know AI very well, so I won't go into any description of technology. But I would just say, if there are a few people in the audience who are not familiar, machine learning is the core part of AI, and deep learning is the most advanced technology that is working. And think of it as in a single domain, when you have a huge amount of training data, it can do things much, much better than people. But only in a single domain with objective functions. So that's all I'm going to say about technology. But I want to talk a bit about applications. Because we are a venture capitalist firm, we've been thinking about what are the areas to invest in. And from our perspective, there are really 4 waves of AI. Now, given AI requires a huge amount of training data, the first natural place is, of course, internet applications, where we are all generators of data and free guinea pigs labeling for the likes of Amazon, Facebook, and Google every day. Every time you make a click, buy something, you are creating data that makes the system smarter and able to guess what you might want to buy next time and send the right ads to you. And what's more important is that AI gives very powerful knobs to the CEOs of these companies so that they can optimize user minutes per user. And that's how Facebook got into trouble, actually, by optimizing towards one goal. Or you can maximize revenue per day or per month, or you can maximize profit. So each of the different objective function will cause the company to display different ads and products and choices to you in order to maximize that function. And that, I think, is the big power of AI. And that's why pretty much all the giant AI companies are first internet companies. That includes the giants here, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, but also the Chinese giants, Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu. They have a huge amount of data, and they use it to extract value and make money. So that's kind of the first wave. The second wave, you might ask, is who else has a lot of data? And those are going to be companies that used to consider the storage of data in the data center as a cost center, and the requirement to store the data as something you have to do in order for archival purposes. Let's say a bank used to have to store all the customer transactions because you don't know when a customer might want to see it. But now with AI, all of those transactions and data becomes mountains of gold that can be used to do things like customers' loan determination, credit card fraud detection, asset allocation, and also deciding what product to try to sell to each customer and estimate each customer's net worth and so on. And that's what one of our investments, Fourth Paradigm, does. And that, of course, is not just for banks, but also insurance companies, financial investors, pretty much any company that has a large amount of data. To give you an idea why AI is so powerful, I'll pick one example in a company that we invested in called Smart Finance. What they do is loans. So basically microloans. Imagine a loan of $500 for something like 6 months and at, let's say, credit card level rates. But it's done through an app. So all you have to do is download the app, fill out the usual things you fill out with loan applications: your name, address, where you work, how much you make, rent, buy, place, and things like that. But also, it asks for your consent to send information from your phone. At the same level, other apps send information to the likes of Facebook and Amazon and Snapchat. And it takes all that information into actually a deep learning function that determines whether to lend the money to you. So now could you imagine going outside Stanford with $500,000, for those of you who have it, and for the first 3,000 people that comes to you, you picked 1,000 of the 3,000 and hand each person $500. So your $500,000 is gone. What do you think the default rate will be? 80%? 90%? What's the likelihood a stranger off the street will pay you the money back? Very low, right? But the default rate for this app is 3%. So how do we manage that? We manage that because of all the information that comes in that no human loan officer could possibly consider. So it would have things like your name, your address. Does it match on the internet? How long did it take for you to type your address? If it takes too long, maybe you were making it up, or maybe you're copying it off something, right? It would also have your contact list, which is submitted just like you do to Facebook and Snapchat. And the contact list, it can be verified. Who's the person you call mom? Is that person, in fact, your mom? And things like that can be double-checked. And also what apps you have installed. Do you have a lot of gaming apps, gambling apps, or serious apps? And that all play a role. And also what kind of a phone you have. What's the model of the phone? Is it a newest iPhone or some old phone? And what day of the week is it? What day of the month is it? Why is that important? Well, is it before payday or is it after payday? You want to borrow the money before payday? Very reasonable. Borrow the money after you've just been paid? That may be a negative signal. And then just for fun, we went to see the 3,000 features that were extracted. And the least important feature turns out to be the battery level. Why does that matter? Well, if you think about it, if you have OCD and charge your phone all the time, it's probably a little bit correlated with someone who tends to repay, right? And if you're kind of irresponsible, letting your battery run out, well, maybe that's a little bit correlated with someone who defaults. Of course, this is a very unimportant feature, but it has some contribution nevertheless. So no human could possibly scan and combine these 3,000 features. So you're probably wondering, well, how did they train the system? Well, of course, based on actual outcome, whether the person returned the loan or not. So now you're starting to figure out, wait a minute, so when you had no data, they had no data to begin with. Well, that's what venture capitalists are for. We give them the money, they lose it at the 20% default rate, they come back for more money. Our default rate is now down to 14%. Can we have another 30 million? Okay, and that kept going. It kept going until they got to about 7%, at which point they could just borrow money from banks and be assured that they are going to make more money from that without using VC money. So you see how terrible our business is. So that's an interesting example. And the third wave is what we call perception, and that is essentially digitizing the physical world with cameras, sensors, microphones, and so on. An examples of that include Amazon Echo, includes the autonomous stores, and of course it includes the very controversial application face recognition, just in the headlines today. I'll use that as an example, not to endorse the use of face recognition, but just as an example of how powerful it can be. Recently, there is a very famous Chinese singer, Jackie Chung. Any of you know? Zhang Xueyou. Okay, very famous. I see some older people here, so you would know him. Very famous singer. So he was giving concerts in China. He gave, I think, 4 concerts. And then after that, he got a nickname, Policeman Chung, because for the safety of those stadiums in which he gave the concerts, as people went in, there was face recognition. And the face recognition was connected to the most wanted criminal list. And then people were apprehended when suspicious people recognitions were made. And then in maybe 70% of the cases, it was a false alarm. So sorry, here's your ID, you're not a criminal. But then 30% of the cases, people were actually from the most wanted list. So imagine just on the technical level, how this could possibly be done without AI. Would any policeman be able to remember 100,000 faces? Of course not. So now we can see these applications are not just at human level or not, but they can be dramatically better than people. And then the fourth layer is what I call autonomous AI, and that's basically robots and autonomous vehicles. We have made a number of investments in this area, including robots that pick fruits, robots that wash dishes. Do you want one? If you want, it's right out. Actually, we can take orders later. It's only $300,000 each. These robots, actually, you would put everything off the table into the machine, and it actually separates them into piles and cleans them. So it's not a dishwasher. So how can they sell any at 300,000? Well, everything comes down, right? With volume, cost will come down. So eventually, you can get one. So robotics in the use of autonomous stores. So we have an investment in China called F5 Future Store. That is an autonomous fast food. You can have a bowl of beef noodles, very authentic Cantonese style, for about $1.50. So that's going to give McDonald's a run for its money, because it's much cheaper and it's completely autonomous, no humans at all, and autonomous convenience stores and so on. And finally, there's the autonomous vehicles, which we all know a lot about, so I won't go into that. So these are the waves I think will really revolutionize almost every imaginable industry. Will there only be 4 waves? Surely not. If you asked me 20 years ago, what are the waves of the internet? I might have told you there are waves related to websites and browsers and search engines or something like that. But we would not be able to predict all the other things that happen later. For example, sharing economy, e-commerce, social, mobile. So those are many more waves of the internet, and AI, I think, will be similar to that. So again, AI is really about a large amount of data in a single domain with label, and then with a fair amount of compute and some experts. These are the magic ingredients that makes AI work. And all the famous scientists are Americans and Canadians. So you would think US is by far the leader in AI. Well, in research, that is the case. But in implementation, I would argue not. And we'll show you why that is. So this book, another one shows the H-index of the top 1,000 researchers. US has 68%. And then China's only 6%. So again, demonstrating US is well ahead. But these are the three issues that one has to consider about AI implementation, application, and monetization. First is, well, how many breakthroughs have there been? People ask me what the y-axis is. I said, I made it up. This basically shows the magnitude of the magnitude and the importance of various types of innovations. And people can draw their own chart. But the idea here is that there has only been one single big breakthrough, and that was 9 years ago. So it is probably a big question whether there will be a lot more breakthroughs in the next decade. And if there are no big breakthroughs, it's hard for US to retain its leadership because the AI technologies are reasonably well understood because of all the open source and the sharing, and people publish online immediately, so there's not even a latency in the journal papers. So all countries are more or less, in terms of implementation, on an even playing field. And given that, I would argue that we are now no longer in the early phase of AI in entrepreneurship, where expertise is the king. But today, we're more in implementation. So it's a question of who can build faster and run faster, and who has more data. So on the last point, I would argue for many applications, you really don't need these super AI experts. Young AI engineers will suffice, especially in waves 1 and 2. So given this, as an example, we run a training camp for AI every summer. This year we had 300 students. Next year we'll do 1,000. And these are largely undergraduate students who have had maybe one course in AI. And then we basically have an industry project leader that after 1 week of courses that we teach, we have basically industry people from autonomous vehicle companies, speech companies, vision companies, lead teams of 8 to build projects. And actually, just in 1 week of lecture, 4 weeks of implementation, they're able to build things like, in this case, it's an autonomous vehicle. It's a toy car, but it has a real camera. It mapped the campus of Beijing University and is able to drive by itself from any building to another building. And this was done by 8 students. So it goes to show you that the barrier of entry is really not that high anymore. So a little bit more detail about China's position. First, there are a lot of young Chinese AI engineers. People are rushing into it. The upper right shows you the picture. The bottom is a lecture that I give, and a little more people than this room. And then the left side, we see the number of articles written in AI at all. Actually, Chinese authors are about 40%, so much larger than even China as a population. So it's just that they haven't become famous yet. They're entering at the bottom of the pyramid, and they're growing. So I think to the extent that AI implementation just requires young, hardworking engineers, China has them. Secondly, Chinese companies are innovative. So this slide shows China began as a copycat. This was only 10 years ago on the leftmost side. Basically, every Chinese company was the Google of China, the Amazon of China, the Yahoo of China, and so on. But very quickly, China began to learn the product market fit. See, in Silicon Valley, I think people really frown upon copying. I'm not talking about IP theft. I'm talking about what Facebook did to Snapchat, for example. Okay? And that happens everywhere in China. And actually, we learn a lot of things by copying. Did we not learn music and art by first copying? And then a small percentage become innovative. And of course, if you're forever a copycat, you'll get nowhere. So in the second phase, you see that the Chinese companies actually are as good, in some cases better than American companies, the ones that inspired them. For example, WeChat is better than WhatsApp. Many of you probably use both of them, and you would know. And Weibo is better than Twitter, at least as a product, maybe not in diversity of content. And, that's a different story. And then in the third phase, actually, these are really innovative applications, all invented in China. I can't even begin to explain each of them. Maybe I'll try one. Kuaishou and TikTok are the top apps in China. Together, they have 220 million daily active users. This is a phenomenal number. And what they are is basically video-based social network, something that doesn't exist at all in the US. In fact, there was a review of TikTok. I think it was in Wall Street Journal from a few days ago, so feel free to check it out. And the total number, there are 7 or 8 apps here, and the total valuation of these brand new Chinese apps is about $300 billion. And this goes to show you that China is becoming innovative. And today, we really have a parallel universe with US basically running on these apps and China running on those apps. And these are parallel universes. So a lot of people keep asking me, can Google go back to China and succeed? Well, it's very hard to traverse the parallel universe. It's just like a Chinese company probably cannot come here and succeed. So the Chinese apps are really every bit as good. And China also has great entrepreneurs, and many of them are going to go into AI. I won't go into details here, but I'll just say that the China approach to building a company is very different than the Silicon Valley approach. Here, I think, is about vision, changing the world, technology-centric, make it light, non-capital intensive. China is almost the opposite. It's just building it fast, tenaciously, iterate quickly, and execute. And one very unique aspect of Chinese entrepreneurship is that the Chinese entrepreneurs, because there's so many copycats around, the only way you can win is winner take all. Not only do you have to win, everyone else has to lose. But also, on top of that, you have to build a business model that is uncopyable. Otherwise, someone will take it. So how do you do that? Well, you make something really incredibly complex, hairy, expensive. That's how you do it. So Meituan, as an example, in the middle is the Grubhub of China, or the Yelp of China. But what they do is they deliver food to every person in a city within 30 minutes for the cost of at 70 cents per delivery. And that has changed the way the Chinese people eat. But how do you do that? They have 600,000 people essentially on Uber. Imagine they're on an Uber-like network. So, and there's reverse surge pricing inviting them to deliver. And also they're on very cheap electrical mopeds that have to have batteries replaced. So they have to build a giant algorithm and bring in and train 600,000 people, pay them minimally, and of course many will turn over and leave. You have to bring more in. So that is the complexity of making this 600,000 Uber-like delivery network that makes their business model impregnable. So the Chinese entrepreneurs are really good at this. And of course, the Chinese, a lot of money is flowing into AI, even more than the US. Last year, 2017, 48% of the world's venture capital went into China, AI. for AI and 38% in the US. The equivalent company is actually rising faster in market valuation in China compared to here. This example is iFlyTech and Nuance. And just Sinovation Ventures alone, our investments, we already have made 5 unicorns in AI. And the youngest of these companies is only less than 2 years old. So it's very, very fast, and they really execute and deliver. And of course, the amount of data is very important. And the right is a generic graph that shows the more data you have, no matter what algorithm, as long as they're reasonable, more data gives you better results. So in the era of AI, if data is the new oil, then China is the new OPEC. Used to say Saudi Arabia, but not a good analogy anymore. Why does China have more data? A lot of people say, oh, it's because there's no privacy, there everybody exchanges data. That is not true. The Chinese companies get data the same way as the American companies. Think of them as getting data, like Facebook and Google. China has more data for 2 reasons. One is breadth, just more people. And one is depth, because the usage is much deeper. The Chinese users, using the example I gave earlier with Meituan, order takeout 10 times more than in the US. Shared bicycle, 300 times more than the US. And every usage is a data point that's used to train AI. And the most important is, of course, the mobile payment. In China, mobile payment is used 50 times more in the US. And some might say, oh, yeah, we've got Apple Pay, it just takes some time. But that is not true, because these are mobile payments unattached to credit cards. Apple Pay, PayPal still largely connect to credit cards. And as long as you connect to credit cards, it's basically taxing the economy at 2%. Or something like that. So in China, the use of mobile payment has become so convenient that you see here in the farmer's market. And my wife last month saw a beggar in Beijing, and he was holding up a sign that says, "I'm hungry, scam me." So I would never joke about that. This is seriously, because nobody has change. No cash, no credit cards. And all of that becomes data used to train the AI. It also will contribute to make China go from a savings economy to a spending economy. Also makes entrepreneurship a lot easier, because you can monetize users from day one. You don't have to wait until you have a million users. So this is another huge benefit. And of course, lastly, Chinese government strongly supports AI. But unlike what most people read, the government came in a little bit late. All the unicorns were made without any government support. They became unicorns on their own capabilities with private capital. However, once the government saw the importance of AI, I think there are a couple of really important things the Chinese government does. One is a techno-utilitarian policy. What that means is let the technology be implemented and see how it goes. If there are problems, then regulate it. So that is how the mobile payment became pervasive. Imagine in the US, if Facebook announced we're going to have a new payment method, I think immediately Visa, MasterCard will complain and say, oh, software companies, they're not reliable, there could be hacks and data could leak and fraud and all that stuff, right? And then there might be regulation. Or checks to slow them down. But in China, when Tencent and Alibaba were proven competent, they were allowed to go forward. Of course, techno-utilitarian doesn't mean everything's allowed. Cryptocurrency, for example, is not legal in China. And of course, the state document, it really sets the tone about the importance of AI. That actually has no budget associated with it. The budget is determined by each reader of the document. For example, in one of our investments in AI for banking, after this document came out, the banks were much more open to buying AI software. So that was helpful to us. In the city of Nanjing, the city government said, well, we have great universities, so let's do an AI park. And China is building a new highway in Zhejiang province with sensors to help the safety of autonomous vehicles. And a new city called Xiong'an, which is the size of Chicago, is being built with 2 layers top layer is, not the whole city, the downtown. The top layer is for pedestrians and pets and bicycles, and the bottom layer is for cars. And that very expensively but nicely avoids the kind of problem that we saw in Phoenix with Uber Autonomous, because the largest problem of autonomous vehicle is when you hit a human. And that's the highest likelihood of casualty. By separating the flow, you eliminated that possibility. Also, the cars driving underneath will have controlled lighting, so also avoiding problems that we saw in Tesla Autopilot, because you have a fixed lighting in the B1 level of roads. So that kind of huge infrastructural spend, I think, will accelerate China's development of AI. So where does China stand in terms of AI implementation? Again, this is not research, this is implementation. I think China came from way behind to a little roughly caught up to probably a little bit ahead going forward. And this is my projection. However, I do want to say this is not a zero-sum game, because Chinese companies right now only sell to Chinese customers. So their success do not come at the expense of an American company. But people want to know where things stand, and this is my estimates. So with two engines now driving AI forward, not one engine, and also lots of money pouring into it, and giants training the experts, and lots of open source and cloud technologies, AI will create a huge amount of value. PwC estimates about $16 trillion in the next 11 years, net increment to the GDP. McKinsey estimates about 13 trillion. So this is the size of the GDP of China plus India. So it's huge. And this will do a lot of things, make a lot of money for people. It could be used to reduce hunger and poverty, but there are also a lot of problems in AI. I know we're going to have a discussion on this, so I'll just talk more quickly over this part. A lot of the top issues are discussed a lot in the US, but future of work is something that may be not discussed as much. So I want to spend just a few minutes on that. Because AI is single domain, lots of data, and it does superhuman capabilities. So what that means is the types of jobs that it can displace will increase over time, because many jobs are routine or repetitive. And those jobs with improvements of AI algorithms will be better done by the machine. Where some of us are sort of still safe, professors, researchers are creative, and CEOs deal with complex problems. So AI is single domain and non-creative. So there's some safety there. This is happening at white collar and blue collar. I personally believe white collar routine jobs will be hurt first, because that's just software. Robotics don't yet have the dexterity of putting an iPhone together, and probably won't for a long time. So here you see examples in the white collar. Citi has announced half of their operational back office will be replaced by automation. Here you see the example of the fast food I was telling you about. That is basically, they're not going to displace any jobs one-on-one, but if they have 50% market share, then McDonald's and KFC will have a reduction in force. And then the last one shows you basically autonomous cashier that is in use in Beijing. If you visit this pastry shop, you pay yourself just with computer vision scanning. And it's only like $2,000 one cashier displacement. So this is really happening very quickly. We should be worried about large number of jobs being displaced. There are many people who would argue, hey, every technology revolution creates more jobs than it disrupts, which may be the case with AI as well. But the problem is we don't know what those jobs are, nor do we know when they'll be created. For example, when internet was started, no one had any idea so many Uber jobs would become available, and it was impossible to predict. So same with AI. But I would say, Uber jobs didn't get created until 20 years after the internet invention. We can't wait that long. Also, AI any job AI creates will tend to be non-routine jobs, because if it were a routine job, then AI would just do it itself. So even if the total number of jobs remains constant or even increases, the people who are displaced, let's say 40% of the workforce over the next 20 years, they will not be able to easily transition from a routine job into a non-routine job. So what jobs can be offered is going to be a significant challenge. One thing I believe gives us hope is that if we think about what AI cannot do, one is that it cannot create, as we mentioned. It's not creative, not strategic. And the other is that it has no empathy or love and has no compassion. And there are many jobs that we don't want a robot to do, that we want to interact with a human. So if we draw these two dimensions, changing it from a one-dimensional to a two-dimensional picture, x-axis showing creativity and y showing compassion or empathy, then we can move these jobs around and we'll see actually there are many jobs in the upper left that will become possible for people who may lose the jobs on the lower left to shift into. As an example, in the area of healthcare, US will need 2.3 million people additional in healthcare, and that includes nursing and home care, elderly care, and so on in the next 6 years. And those jobs aren't easily getting filled because the job of an elderly caretaker is about $19 an hour, and it pays about less than half of a truck driver or heavy machine operator. Yet the heavy machine operator's job may disappear, but the elderly caretaker will actually need more and more. As we live longer, our longevity increases. People over 80 need 5 times as much care as people between 60 and 80. And that will create an opportunity for more jobs. And we can even imagine many jobs that are not being paid today. For example, someone who homeschools his or her children, or hotline volunteer, elderly companion. These are jobs that may be unpaid or voluntary. One could imagine that if people from the lower left were to lose the jobs, these could become paid jobs. I think this approach would be much better than universal basic income, which gives money to everyone, whether they need it or not. But this will give targeted training for people to move into more compassionate jobs. A very good example is Amazon, which announced this April that it will offer $12,000 reimbursement for taking classes up to 4 years. So for taking classes into new professions that are in big need or less likely to be displaced by AI. You've got to think Jeff Bezos thinking about his Whole Food cashiers. He's thinking about his warehouse pickers. You know how Amazon has Kiva move the large things and then the people actually does the picking? Well, we all know from our robotic professors over the next 5 years, a lot of that will be done by become automated. So this is actually a very interesting and generous move by Amazon. And actually, many of you probably don't know, but the average salary at Facebook and Google is about $200,000. And at Amazon, it's $28,000. Sorry, the median. It's $28,000. So offering $12,000 of reimbursable training on a $28,000 salary, that's a pretty generous step. And Jeff Bezos has said that he would like to feel his responsibility isn't just with shareholders, but also with employees by ensuring that they are still employable even if they're displaced, even if the job isn't available in Amazon. The types of classes he offers are aeronautic repair, something that can be understandably trained if someone took the class who was a warehouse picker, or a nurse, someone who could probably also be trained if he or she was a cashier. So these are really steps that we need to take. So in terms of whether AI displaces jobs, actually lower left side, they will be displaced largely by AI. But the lower right side are where AI can be a tool to make the scientists more creative, to help invent more drugs, and for the same amount of time and to alleviate pain and cure diseases. And then on the upper left is a different type of human-machine symbiosis where AI might perform most of the analytical part of a task, where a human adds the warmth. For example, a doctor might use more and more AI tools and diagnostics to determine what's wrong with the patient and what to do. But it is the doctor who would communicate with the patient, tease out all the issues, problems, family history, input it into the computer, and then explain it to the patient in a way that comforts the patient, gives the patient confidence, maybe with home visits and so on. And we know that through the placebo effect, if the patient has higher confidence, there's a higher likelihood of recuperation or survival. And then on the upper right is really where humans really shine with both our compassion and creativity. So this is the blueprint of coexistence of human and AI. So in my talk, I've talked about the opportunities and challenges in the next 15 to 20 years, but I firmly believe if we look a little bit beyond that, for the students in the room, when your children enter the workforce, I think when 30, 40 years from now, when they look back and think what AI meant for humanity, I think what they will think is that really two things. First, AI is serendipity because it liberates us from routine jobs so that we can spend more time with our loved ones, we can do things we're passionate about, and we can have time to think about what it means to be human. And also, if people are worried about AI, AI is just a tool, and we are the only ones with the free will. And we set the goals for AI, so we humans are going to write the ending of the story of AI. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kai-Fu Lee. I want to welcome to the stage Professor Susan Athey and Professor Eric Brynjolfsson to start our discussion.
That's terrific. Yeah, thanks.
So we have a tradition at AI Salon where we always use our hourglass to identify the time because we use no technology during AI Salon. This is an Enlightenment era salon where technology doesn't exist yet. So in light of that, we will also be using our hourglass to track the time. And so this will be an hour for our discussion. I just want to do a quick introduction of our two other guests here. Professor Susan Athey is a professor at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. She received her bachelor's degree from Duke University and her PhD from Stanford. Her current research focuses on the economics of digitization, marketplace design, and the intersection of econometrics and machine learning. She's one of the first tech economists and served as a consulting chief economist for Microsoft Corporation for 6 years. And in 2007, Professor Athey became the first female winner of the John Bates Clark Medal, one of the most prestigious awards in the field of economics. Professor Eric Brynjolfsson is a director of the MIT Initiative on Digital Economy and a professor at the MIT Sloan School. His research examines the effects of information technologies on business strategy, productivity, and performance, on digital commerce, and intangible assets. He was one of the first researchers to measure the productivity and contributions of IT, and his research has appeared in leading economics, management, and science journals, and recognized with 10 Best Paper Awards and 5 patents. So thank you guys so much for being here today. I wanted to start out the salon by kind of thinking about the applications of AI. So Kai-Fu here talked a lot about many different uses, such as loans, or we can think of things in the news like AlphaGo, for Go, autonomous driving. But how generally applicable is this technology? I was wondering if, Eric, you can talk more about this.
Well, I think Kai-Fu was exactly right, that these are some amazing technologies, but they're quite narrow in many ways. And I think this is one of the biggest misunderstandings in the popular press, especially with Hollywood, where there's a lot of sort of impression of that we're close to what a lot of people call artificial general intelligence, or AGI. And we're really very far from it. There are more breakthroughs. We don't know how many are needed. But deep learning by itself is quite remarkable, but can't I think most people would agree, get us to AGI. That said, we don't want to make the opposite mistake and underplay how remarkable these breakthroughs are. So in certain specific areas, I think image recognition is a particularly good one. Fei with the ImageNet set off an explosion of work to showing how rapidly you could, using deep learning techniques, get to recognize images, voice recognition, credit decisions, and Kai-Fu gave lots of other examples. And each of those are in their own narrow way, not just human, but superhuman. The issue is that when a human is able to do something extremely well, speak Chinese, you assume they also know something about which Chinese restaurants are good or which, something about Chinese culture. AI, it would be a mistake to take extreme competence in one domain and generalize it to other areas.
I see. So kind of going off of that, Susan, you just gave a tutorial at NeurIPS about causal inference. And you kind of talked about a lot of unanswered questions in the field of AI and a lot of work that we still have to do. Can you talk a little bit more about the research agenda that your group and other researchers are working on to make AI more generally applicable?
Yeah, so first I would just say I really agree with the perspective in the book and also the way that Eric has nuanced it, that we have this incredible revolution and the big breakthrough of neural nets allowed us to solve problems that we couldn't solve before. But yet those problems still fall into fairly narrow classes. So, trying to understand, in some sense, AlphaGo is a very hard game because it has a very big state space. But it's still a game where if I have two strategies, I can play them against each other and see which one is better. And so the computer can generate massive amounts of training data. The actual algorithms used in AlphaGo are very similar to what we've been using for decades in economics to try to learn from either human behavior or firm optimization decisions or firm equilibria about their payoffs and to try to simulate what would happen in a different world. And that's sort of a form of counterfactual inference, trying to understand what would happen if something changed a bit. But even though the sort of conceptual approaches are similar, the neural nets don't necessarily make a big breakthrough for those problems. I'm not going back to revisit those problems using all I've learned about machine learning, because the problem there was actually just lack of data. If we're trying to study, where Walmart and Target should put their stores, or how much firms should invest in, or even how a human should make dynamic decisions about training or unemployment, those decisions, we still have like a relatively small data set to study them, and the real problem is kind of data sparsity and also lack of enough sort of experimental variation in the data to really learn about cause and effect. So even though these breakthroughs are huge, it's not to say that, oh, well, we tackled Go, so next step is to replace the economist. Kai-Fu noted that economists wouldn't be replaced. I was very happy. He also noted that we don't have a lot of compassion, which sadly is true of my colleagues, hopefully not of me. But so I think it's really just as Eric said. It's not like it's just one short leap from the problems that we've solved, even though they sound hard, to other types of business problems. And so then in terms of the research agenda, though, I think there is actually a really exciting research agenda. And I think for the next generation of students, now that we've sort of ingested AI, and as Kai-Fu talked about, it's become more incremental, I think we can go back to some of the techniques that we used in the more small data world. Because inside every AI is an agent that's trying to make decisions. They're doing counterfactual reasoning. How should I climb the wall? What kind of recommendations should I make? These are decisions. And so you have to do counterfactual reasoning. You have to think, well, what would happen if I made this decision? What would happen if I make that decision? And inside the agent is sort of a statistician trying to use a small amount of data to figure out what decision there is to make. That is a hard problem, and it's an especially hard problem in a data-poor environment, where maybe you're in a situation you haven't been in before, and you need to still reason about what comes next. That's really a more human-like reasoning, and one way to make it better is to put some structure on the problem. Don't just learn from the data in a completely unstructured way, but actually use what you know about the environment, use the domain knowledge about the system that you're in, can make you much more efficient with the limited data that you have. But that's not been the focus of the last 10 years of machine learning. And so I think it's actually really exciting going forward to think about marrying those. And that's what I'm doing in my lab, but just on a small number of problems. There's really a much broader set of questions. And then the last theme that I focused on in my tutorial was how thinking about things this way, putting a little bit more of a structured way of thinking on things, can actually solve a lot of the problems that AI has had in the implementation phase. So when you go out to implement, if you want to get humans to listen to you, you have to be interpretable. People have to believe you. They have to trust you. You have to actually be able to tell a human that you're making a recommendation to, do I know the answer to this? Maybe I'm uncertain over here. Maybe I'm more certain over here. Maybe my algorithm might be biased over here, but over here I've got plenty of data and I think you should trust it. We need to deal with these issues of stability and trustworthiness. And so that also really requires a clear conceptual framework and layering that conceptual framework on top of all of the algorithmic innovations that we've had. So I'm really excited about the next 10 years of basic AI research. And at Stanford, we're really putting a lot of emphasis on that. Human-centered AI is something that Fei is helping lead us on, and I'm really excited about what we're going to be able to do in that area to make the domains of AI more applicable.
Yeah, so I feel like in the past 10 years, speaking of these great innovations and breakthroughs within AI, there kind of has been two extreme responses to the breakthroughs. On one hand, you have optimists like Ray Kurzweil, who says AI will create a paradise for humans. On the other hand, you have doomsayers like Elon Musk saying that AI will create robot killers that will kill us all. So if we see that as like a spectrum, which of course it may not be one, but if it is a spectrum, I'm just curious to hear where all of you are on that spectrum. Do you believe that AI is paradise, or is AI going to kill us all? Eric, you're shaking your head there.
It's going to kill us all. No.
Okay.
No, I am very frustrated that is so much of the discussion out there. I mean, first getting back to what we were saying earlier, we're still quite far from AGI. I know Ray Kurzweil has a different view on that, but most AI researchers that I've spoken to would disagree with him in terms of how close we are to that. But there's a more fundamental point, and it's really a key point that Kai-Fu makes in his book, which you guys should look at, and he made in his talk. And I want to hit on it again, which is that the technology is a tool. So the right question isn't, what is AI going to do to us? Is it going to give us nirvana? Is it going to solve all of our problems for us? Is it going to kill us all? No. Those are both those questions are not opposite ends of the spectrum. They're really saying the same thing, which is treating AI as if it's the one that makes the decisions. And the reality is that technology is a tool. A hammer is a tool, AI is a tool, and those tools can be used in lots of different ways. They can be used to do constructive things, they can be used to do destructive things. And the real important reason that we have to understand that is too many people, I think, are being passive about what's going on. And we have to recognize that we are agents, as Kai-Fu was saying. We can make these decisions, and we have to decide what kind of society do we want to live in? Do we want to have one with the kind of compassion that Kai-Fu was calling for? What does that mean in terms of the policies we put in place? What does it mean in terms of us as workers, as CEOs, as citizens? We have to take agency and use these tools in different ways. And then the question isn't which of those is going to happen, it's which one do we want to have happen, and what steps are we going to take to achieve that?
Well, I just want to kind of then bring that to our topic at hand today, which is AI in the future of work. It is true that AI is definitely a tool, but there are projections. In fact, Kai-Fu writes in his book that perhaps 40 to 50% of jobs will be replaced in the next 20, 30 years. And that is a huge number of people who will be out of jobs and out of work. And that's going to have great impact on society. I'm just wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about what kind of impact this will have on the workforce, and how can we prepare for that?
Kai-Fu, why don't you elaborate a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, there have been different types of estimates from a lot of different studies. My numbers are more aggressive. McKinsey and OECD and others have come out with different numbers. Generally, in terms of the numbers, people are believing that we should look at how many tasks can be done by AI, not the jobs. However, when you have a job, half of the task can be done, there's going to be 50% of the people who will probably not be working, right? So, so on the one hand, I think it's a scary large number, but also if we look at agriculture to manufacturing transition, their numbers are even larger than that. So the issue really isn't how many jobs are displaced. Many of the jobs that, when you graduate from here, are jobs that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. So having new jobs and having jobs go away has been the de facto, right? The status quo. It always happens. I think the issue really is when we went from agriculture to manufacturing, the people from the farms were able to now go to the factories because of the relative unskilled, low training required to be on the assembly line, for example. The big problem now is I think AI is displacing mostly the routine work. And the people who are displaced really need to find their place in a new place. And it's not just a loss of income issue, but it's a loss of meaning that people attach their meaning to the work that they do. And yet, when most or all routine jobs or tasks are gone, people have to really be trained to do the more complex non-routine tasks. So I think the big issue is one about training. And Amazon has shown one way of training. I share the positive example, but that's because they're almost $1 trillion company. They can afford it. Walgreens has the same workforce that will be displaced. I don't think they can afford the training program. So I think we really have to think about how corporations and governmental programs can be applied. For example, in the US Congress, there are a number of bills being discussed, such as giving human resource training credits back to companies. So I think it's going to be moves like that, not universal basic income, that starts to move the dial forward. The last comment I'll make is that China and US are quite different. I think China is a very decisive, execution-oriented form of government. And in the last phase of the transition from agriculture to manufacturing, the government played a very strong role of saying, okay, we're shutting these down, you guys move over there, you're going to become that in your new job. So a very, very top-down organization, which in the case of a crisis may be more effective. So I think actually US probably should be a little bit more concerned because with the government not being able to move people from job to job, and also and also I think currently unemployment numbers are at historic low. I worry whether US government is going to do anything in this area.
So Susan, do you want to elaborate, or do you have a different opinion on this?
Well, so first let me agree with everything that Kai-Fu said, and I think actually I'm also concerned about the U.S. policy in the sense that it's not like our government has gotten more functional in the last few years, and yet we may need to be preparing for something really important. And at the moment, we don't actually know, if you wrote me a big check, I don't know how to spend it in terms of making workers better off. We actually just don't have that muscle, that capability. We don't know how to retrain people. We don't know what to retrain them for. So I'm concerned that the time will come when we will need that and we're not going to be ready for it. And actually that's a big emphasis that I'm moving into in my own research, is to try to work with other scholars and students here at Stanford to try to prototype digital and AI-driven worker training and also worker recommendations to try to help people understand and make better decisions. So I completely agree it's an important problem. And then even with the displacement coming relatively soon, I advise a lot of companies, banks all over the world have call centers in poor parts of their countries. And those call centers really will be gone they're really not economical today. They're going to be shutting down over the next few years, and there's going to be these concentrated hits to regions that already lost manufacturing. They already lost a bunch of stuff, and they're on their last legs, and then the call centers will go too. And I think that's going to be problematic. And we've had some interesting research by Daron Asamoglu at MIT and co-authors kind of showing how, when you get these concentrated hits, like from robots in Detroit, that those areas really can spiral down. On the other hand, now I'm an economist, I have two hands. On the other hand, there's also some reasons to be less concerned. So Hal Varian's an eminent economist, and he's been giving a really nice talk about this recently, and his talk is called Bots versus Tots. And so he takes the most aggressive numbers about worker displacement, but then he looks at demographic trends. So it's a little bit hard to predict the future in a lot of ways, but demographics are actually pretty easy to predict. Like, we kind of know how many people will be 50, 30 years from now. Okay, so that's something that's easier to predict. And in fact, in developed countries with falling birth rates and also China's very harmful one-child policy, ends up with this aging workforce. What I really like from Kai-Fu's discussion is how old people actually need a lot of care, and we're going to have all these people consuming but not working. And so we're actually, without big changes in immigration policy, we're actually going to have worker shortages over the next 30 years. And Hal argues, it's not my research, but Hal argues that those effects are bigger than the most aggressive job loss effects from AI. So if you put those together, though, what's right and what's wrong, it's hard to know, but I think that pushes you in a couple of directions. Not so much universal basic income, but instead, why don't we be thinking about how we're going to take care of the elderly, which could be augmented by AI, and in both physical robots as well as monitoring and so on, and decision assistance. You could probably have one human per old person, and like if anybody's cared for an aging relative, it's actually pretty labor intensive, and so you actually could employ a lot of people in these service jobs. And so I think we should be looking at sort of labor augmenting technology, and if the government's going to do something, they can train people to work in those things, and also they can subsidize the services. But in the end, there's plenty of work. We could have one worker per every preschool child and one worker per every older sick person, and kind of employ everybody. So I'm not worried about not enough jobs, but I am worried about how we get there.
You're ready to say something.
I just want to very much underscore what Susan just said, that Kai-Fu's right. Many jobs are going to be eliminated, maybe 30, 40, 50%. But I don't think that there's a shortage of work that needs to be done in our society that only humans can do, because machines can't do the whole spectrum of things. Even within particular tasks, there are a lot of things that require humans that I think we value a lot: taking care of the elderly, taking care of kids, cleaning the environment, a lot of creative work, arts, entertainment, that are inherently require humans, at least with existing technologies and those that will be for some time. So our challenge, I don't think, is so much the end of work. Our challenge is this transition that Kai-Fu alluded to, and that Susan was underscoring. And how do we get people to shift? I'm a little bit more optimistic than Susan about that. We do know some of the things that can be done. I think that if you take Kai-Fu's points about creativity and compassion as being important things, I think we can do more to have education that supports creativity, that supports interpersonal skills, and in fact, if you think about it right now, a lot of schools, 19th and 20th century schools, were designed to stamp those out. Like, don't be doodling, don't play. But if you put a pile of blocks in front of a kid, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to want to start building things. So inherently, I think we like being creative, and if our schools didn't stop us, we'd probably be even more creative. And we like interacting with other people. We like playing. We like teamwork. So we could do more in our education to support that, and those are the kinds of skills that are going to be in more demand. The other side of it is entrepreneurship. On one hand, we want to have the skills in the workforce. On the other hand, we need people who can figure out how can recombine those skills with technology to solve existing problems. Well, we have a whole class of people that's their job, is to make those new combinations. We call them entrepreneurs. They're not usually professors or policymakers. And the surprising statistics that I saw were that not in Silicon Valley, but in the United States as a whole, entrepreneurship is down. That we have less creative destruction, less invention, less new business formation, fewer businesses that are 5 years old, less turmoil in the market as companies reconfigure than we did 10, 20, or 30 years ago. So we need to do more also to make our economy in the United States more dynamic. I think that I'm also more optimistic than Kai-Fu that a entrepreneurial, decentralized economy can respond to these kinds of transitions if we make it a little bit easier to do it. But ultimately, the challenge, again, is not that lots of people simply won't have jobs. It's that those people won't be transitioning to the new kinds of jobs that are needed. And when a technology automates part of a task, and this is some work I did with Tom Mitchell, when it automates part of a job, like a radiologist, there are 26 different tasks that radiologists do. It could automate some of those, but there are other ones that actually become more important. So the re-engineering will be the big challenge for us going forward, both at the task and occupation level, at the industry and firm level, and at the societal level.
Well, one comment on another dimension is other countries other than US and China. I think there's going to be potentially more major problems there, especially countries that have been hoping to use the China model or the India model to climb out of poverty, right? Because China did use the lower cost labor workforce to outsource manufacturing. India uses English-speaking population to take care of call centers and IT outsourcing, et cetera. But these jobs are the ones that are going to be displaced. So China and US can absorb that because there are all these value creation engines, entrepreneurs and big companies. What about the poorer countries that had been hoping to use the China or India model? And on top of that, they don't have the revenue drivers, the big AI companies or tech companies. And on top of that, the workforce is relatively less trained. So I think that presents a bigger issue for a lot of other countries.
Well, you're talking about the very poor countries. I also have concerns about Europe for different reasons. But I guess, and that really gets back to one of your boxes that you didn't have time to talk about in your talk, which is sort of market power. And it's completely good thing for China in the sense that they're Google isn't the only search engine in the whole world, and of course Bing, where I used to work. But I think it's really important for the world that there's more than one tech company doing each particular thing. But a lot of these things do end up being very concentrated, and so
especially for AI, where
exactly,
you
there's
need
huge
lots of
economies of
data,
scale.
and then it eventually becomes monopolies. How do we deal with that?
Exactly, and I spent years trying to help Microsoft's search engine compete with Google's search engine, so I've spent a lot of time thinking about how important data is and how hard it is to be a number 2 company to a number 1 company that has more data, and the answer is it's hard. And so that is something that we need to really consider, and we haven't seen as many European tech companies, which means that the whole community and capability hasn't built up as much there to participate in this. And so we already have trouble redistributing within a country. We're really bad at redistributing across countries. And so these countries are going to have challenges sort of keeping up, and especially given that at least maybe in the Western world, we're going to have a lot of concentration. And so I think that gets back to the inequality question. And another concern that I have is that we have to think about how the benefits of productivity get passed along to consumers. So just roughly, if you talk to a macroeconomist, the old-fashioned simplistic 101 models would say that, how could AI be bad? If you can make more outputs with less inputs, you have to be better off. And if we're all identical and we all own an equal share in the one factory that produces our outputs, then making it more productive just has to be good, sort of tautologically. How could we be worried about being able to make more stuff with less inputs? But of course, when you have a real economy where we are not all owning shares equally in everything, then this distribution comes in. And then there's a question of market power. So we could replace all of our workers with robots. That, in principle, could lower the marginal cost of output, which lowers the marginal cost of living, right? Because if the cost goes down, the prices can go down, and then it's actually cheaper to live. So you might have lower wages, but also lower cost of products, and everybody's fine. But if there's a lot of market power, then the company might actually keep a lot of that as profits. they can lower their costs. And of course, some people share in that, but maybe the workers don't. And so I think we're going to need to be thinking a lot about making sure that all of these productivity benefits actually get passed on to consumers. So that's one component of cost of living. Health is another one. Transportation and housing is another really big one. And so actually getting back to what can we do, we need to think about how our policy towards things like transportation in the advent of autonomous vehicles or changes in transportation actually affect the ability of people to get service jobs in cities. Here in the Bay Area, you can't hire a service worker very easily. People might have to commute 2 hours to live cheaply. That's a totally solvable problem. And especially with improvements in technology, we should be able to have a much wider set of land where people could live and work in the cities. But making that actually work for people, that is, making these changes lead to great public transportation and low-cost transportation for the poor, rather than just a bunch of rich people riding around in their autonomous vehicles and clogging up the roads all the time, watching videos in their cars and sitting on their exercise bikes. There's different visions of the future, right? I mean, if you make it more pleasant to be in a car, people will be in cars more, which can clog up the roads. On the other hand, if we put in congestion pricing and make it more of a public transportation thing, we could actually allow the poor to live much more cheaply and work in service jobs in cities. So we're really going to have to rethink our entire public policy around urban economics and the economics of cities. And I think the good news is that autonomous vehicles gives us a chance to rethink it. And actually, even the advent of Uber. People are getting grumpy about all the traffic caused by Uber in New York, and now they're talking about congestion pricing. Great. Congestion pricing is great. It makes people carpool, and it can actually make everybody better off, even the poor. And so we should take this opportunity for the policy debate to take it in a constructive direction. While zoning, there's nothing I can do to make my friends in Palo Alto want to build high-rises. That's a really intractable political problem. But maybe improving transportation is something we can all get around.
So it sounds like, Susan, you're calling for more regulation and policy, whereas Kai-Fu, you're saying that there are things that private companies can do, such as what Amazon's doing. Eric, you're kind of in the middle there with this idea that entrepreneurs and startups can actually create more jobs.
Well, I think it's important to think that this is not something that any one part of society is going to solve. Mm-hmm. It's across the board, and I really think it would be nice if we had a government that really understood these issues well and was able to take its role, and CEOs who saw it as their responsibilities, and workers and citizens who did. But I think we need to work on all different fronts. Mm-hmm. We've introduced something called the Inclusive Innovation Challenge, recognizing companies and organizations that are using technology to create more shared prosperity. I've talked to people in Congress and administration about the policies there. I'm happy that a lot of CEOs see that as their responsibility, not just shareholder wealth maximization. But it's something, there's so many changes on different dimensions of society that we can't delegate to any one part.
Absolutely. I thought it was really interesting. In the book, Kai-Fu, you wrote about how Larry Fink, the BlackRock founder, actually wrote a letter this year, right before the World Economic Forum, saying that he believes society is increasingly turning to the private sector and asking companies to respond to broader societal challenges, which is something we've been talking about. And society is demanding that companies, both public and private, serve a social purpose. So, Kai-Fu, as a VC, as someone who actually plays a big role in funding companies and perhaps even creating incentive structures for startups, how do you think about incentivizing more companies or asking more companies to play a bigger role in society?
Mm-hmm. I think the role that we can play, the only role we can play, is to find those great entrepreneurs who will have a big heart and see purpose beyond just making money. That's probably the tangible thing that we can do, which is why we don't invest in many areas, and we didn't invest in certain entrepreneurs. In terms of what each of us can do, a VC can choose to. Law firms have pro bono. VCs could have pro bono. Right? Mm-hmm. The pro bono could be going into social investing, investing in a company that may not make a lot of money, but might be providing the one caretaker per elderly, or some kind of homeschooling, or any one of these issues. So I think each of us can really do something, and that letter was made a big impact at World Economic Forum, because people were surprised, and it made sense. So hopefully that will happen naturally with each person doing whatever he or she can.
Yeah, Eric, do you want to add?
One thing I think economists don't appreciate enough is that people are not motivated just by money. And even the founders, CEOs of some of these big companies, I talked to Reid Hoffman, who has billions of dollars, why they all work so hard, and to get more millions. He said he thought a lot of it, by introspection, talking to his colleagues, was what they really wanted wasn't necessarily the next $1 billion. It was the recognition and status and relative position that they got from that. And that means that there's a lever to do what Kai-Fu just said, to say, look, we're going to recognize people for doing the right thing for society. We want to give you status for doing that, not just the Forbes 400 list of the richest people, but people who've done things in other ways. And let's face it, all through history, people have often been recognized for those things. There was this diversion where some economists really highlighted just money as the goal, and I think a lot of CEOs wins that, and greed is good was the extreme version of it. I think that got us a little off track and got too many people focused on that narrow goal. But corporations are ways of getting a bunch of people to work together for a common goal, and that common goal can be to help disable people or other things, as well as dollar maximization. And the more all of us on this panel and all of you out there recognize that and talk it up, we are actually going to make a difference in how people, what kinds of motivations people have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think actually universities can play a really central role in that. And I certainly find that students really want to work on impactful projects. And so, young AI students, they want to learn AI, but if I give them a project where they can use AI for a socially impactful goal, they're all the more excited about it. And so one of the things that I've been trying to get started here at Stanford, I have this little initiative on shared prosperity and innovation that's funded by Schmidt Futures. And there, what we're trying to do is to combine technological innovations for social good with also the design of market-based incentives, where we could actually go to a big philanthropist and say, hey, we've prototyped this product. We think that this is something that would be good for social impact. We also think that we might be able to have a pot of money out there to subsidize its adoption or to reward the social entrepreneurs for bringing that to market. And so we would be thinking both about designing the products and doing the research for the products at an early stage, but also trying to make sure that the financial incentives are there to get the products into use, and so that the entrepreneurs are really rewarded for the social impact. Some of my colleagues did that for the pneumococcal vaccine and something called the Advanced Market Commitment, where they raised billions of dollars in a pot that was dedicated towards subsidizing pneumococcal vaccines. And so we could also use things like that, ideas like that, to subsidize technological solutions to social problems. And AI is a great opportunity for that, because it's a lot of fixed costs, but not a lot of marginal costs to deliver. And so it's really a great place where philanthropic impact could come in. So I'm actually pretty optimistic about our ability to channel the philanthropists as well as the leading universities and research communities to try to tackle some of these problems.
Absolutely. So I can see our glass is kind of running out, so we're actually going to open for audience questions. You'll see that there are microphones there, and so please line up. And while people are lining up, I just have kind of one last question I wanted to ask Kai-Fu. Which is that I found it incredibly poignant in your book that you talk about your battle with cancer and how that battle led you to realize there are more things in life than just optimizing for fame, for wealth, for or even making impact in this world. Since we have a lot of people here who are young, who are starting their careers, I was wondering if you can give some advice to us on what should we think about as we try to build actually a meaningful life rather than just a life where we optimize for certain outcomes?
Yeah. So my big awakening moment was actually with a Buddhist monk when I was ill, I went to the mountains and met this very wise monk. His name is Master Xing Yun in Taiwan. And basically, he asked me, what's the purpose of your life? And I said, well, I'm here to make the biggest difference, and then I want to maximize my impact, and I measure everything that way, almost like an AI algorithm. I didn't say that to him.
We thought economists were bad, my goodness.
Yeah. No, I would actually calculate everything, and I can go into, there are details in my book on all the crazy things I used to do. But then he said, a very big weakness of humans is that they cannot resist temptation of fame and vanity. And when you say you want to make the biggest impact, are you sure you want to make the world better? Is that your top priority? Or is it that you just want to make yourself more famous? And the two I found actually was inseparable. I was facing cancer, and I had to give an honest answer. And I said, no, I think the two are inseparable. Sometimes I use the make a big impact to mask my own vanity and desire. And he said, well, here's what you should do. Measure everything you do by, if everyone did it in the world, would the world be a better place? Think about yourself. So separate yourself from the process in things that you do. Is this good for the world? Disregarding yourself, and think more about the people who have loved you, helped you, and have you given back at least what they have done for you? And that's the first step. And then if one day you can unconditionally love and help other people, that is the day that you have really grown up.
Wow.
So that was a big awakening moment. Also, I think facing cancer made me realize that all the work and accomplishments that I had achieved really didn't mean anything. When I found out I had fourth stage lymphoma, I didn't want to work another day. This is the last thing I wanted to do. I wanted to spend time with my family. I wanted to do things that I like. Of course, I wanted to get better. And I read during my illness this book by end-of-life caring nurse. Her name was Bronnie Ware, and she cared for 2,000 people before they passed away. And she said there are 5 regrets of the dying. And number 1 is that they didn't spend enough time with the people that they love and loving them back. Number 2 was they didn't follow their passion and really did what in their heart they know they want to do. And number 3 was that they listened too much to the environment and of what the society or their friends and family think what they should be, rather than what they themselves know what they want to be. And then the 4th one was they work too hard. So actually, that should be guidance to all of us, that if someone facing death, no one regretted working so hard, I think we should all rethink the priorities. And now that I'm better, I'm in remission, I still work hard, but I also prioritize things that matter higher. So it's not that I don't work 60 hours a week. I used to probably work 80, now I work 60, still work pretty hard. But I really, when my family needs something, I would put that ahead of myself. And it's not for them to ask me what they want. It is for me to know what they want before they need to ask me. And when my daughters have vacation, I change my schedule to match their vacation, not the other way around. And I think that's given me a much better outlook and made me a lot happier.
Absolutely, thank you. Do you want to start over there with Andrew?
So one of the things that was discussed was the big data gap between China and the US, and how these private companies are using that to create better services and technologies. And as we talk about how big of an impact good policy can make to solve these issues of job displacement, do you think there's also a data gap to close in terms of what the government has access to in order to better, more quickly diagnose local conditions and figure out better targeted policies in the U.S.?
Probably more your Your area.
No, okay.
It's for me? Well, the governments obviously have a lot of data, but I haven't seen a lot of wisdom in governments on how they can use or share the data. And a lot of the data that's used by private companies to deliver good products are data in the closed loop. So, just having the census data itself doesn't really necessarily help you that much in building AI. So I guess.
Yeah, that's actually a theme that I push a lot in my discussions as well, and I thought a lot about it in search. It's like just having Google's data or giving Google's data to someone else isn't what you need. It's the closed loop that Google's interacting and experimenting actively.
But I've heard you when you're talking to Hal, you were disappointed that Bing, even if they had better engineers, wouldn't be able to get to the same outcomes because they didn't have as much data.
Well, but I just want to be careful. So the data is important, but it's actually the data that's in an operational system. So just historical data isn't as useful as the current live data, and also being able to run randomized experiments to learn what works and what doesn't. Governments, so, cities actually are being pretty innovative in the U.S. and probably I think all over the world. Singapore, places like that. Are using data to be more efficient with government services, and I actually think in terms of using AI to just make people's lives better on a daily basis, that may end up popping up from the cities.
Can I ask a follow-up question for Kai-Fu? You talked about China, these two internets in a way. I've heard Eric Schmidt was quoted, or perhaps misquoted, as saying he thought there were going to be two internets. He said actually he didn't quite say it that way. But there's the great firewall of China and how difficult it is to have moved data between the two. So first question is, do you see that evolving that way? And secondly, a related one, there's 1.3 billion people in China. There's a lot more people outside of China. So arguably the companies that have the part of the world outside of China have more data, not less data.
Well, actually, until they have the closed loop, they don't have more data. But yes, they have the potential to have more data. So first on the China internationalization question. Actually, I think China has, over the last 10 years, tried to go global and not very successful. And the reason is US has done such a good job with the demographics like US. So for a search engine or a social network, it's very difficult because the American companies have already globalized. But very interestingly, almost all the companies I listed on that new column are not targeting mainstream US people. Right. Like the video social app is targeting the millennials. And probably more in developing countries. So China actually has multiple demographics. So there are many people like us who use the internet the way we use it, even though it's a parallel universe. But there are also new users emerging in small towns and villages. The young people and the older people have very different habits. And very interestingly, those are where the new innovations are happening. And when those are successful, they're being actually internationalized fairly successfully. So TikTok actually is a global phenomenon. So my prediction is that the top American giants will continue to dominate developed countries, and the Chinese software will make very good progress in developing countries, in particular Southeast Asia, Africa, Middle East, and possibly South America and India. I'm not sure. But American multinationals don't really focus on these regions because the ARPU is very low. They don't make too much money. So I think it's giving China an opportunity. It's actually matching the Belt Road Initiative, not because the government encourages it, but because that's where the Chinese software companies seem to be having some success.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to ask the next two questions to the next two people to ask their questions, and then we'll answer. So please go ahead.
Great. Good evening. So you talked about the parallel universe of AI technologies, and then also this idea of around trust and how society can trust the AI applications. I'm curious, for verticals such as autonomous weapons that probably implicitly to some degree require these parallel universes to communicate to some degree, how you think institutional governments can work together in the landscape of understanding and trust.
Okay, so let's have you ask the question and then we'll answer.
Hi, so I'm Dekai. As an AI professor, as Kai-Fu knows, sort of pioneered things like Google Translate, and certainly agree with Eric that we're far, far away from like AGI, strong AI type stuff, and that we need to focus more on the small data conditions that Susan was talking about. That said, our work in the areas of computational creativity and applying to music, as well as things like language, I'm not sure that the conclusions that we were looking at, whether that reflects a technological and scientific reality, or rather a comforting mythology that somehow creativity and compassion are the realm of the human, and that we can't model that just as well as we can model the other stuff. And perhaps, just to suggest an alternate framing, the things in your upper left quadrant, maybe framing this in terms of skills is not the right way to look at it.
Do you have a question
maybe
for the panel?
Yeah, the question is this. Maybe I'd like to hear the right framing is more about things like companionship, which is, the human need for companionship. Have you considered that?
Okay.
So companionship and weapons.
Okay.
A match made in heaven.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll take the easier one first. Well, the axes were really multidimensional in each label. As Susan said earlier, I didn't intend that economists have no compassion. That axis really meant human touch, companionship, communication skills, empathy, compassion, things that we feel is human to human required, that a robot is not acceptable. So I think that's how.
But that's what I'm asking. Maybe the robot is able to do that, and it's not a question of whether AI can acquire the skills to do that, but rather just the need for humans to do that with other humans rather than with machines.
I see. No, I would agree. I think clearly AI can recognize emotion. I think some recent research shows as well as people, right? And AI can certainly fake emotion. Currently not very well, but over time it will get better. But it is people who will ultimately reject that kind of companionship. I agree. On the weapons issue, you might be interested in reading a paper by Dr. Kissinger in The Atlantic. While he, I don't think, fully understands AI, but I think he sees the dangers as it relates, because I think many countries are looking at how AI can be a part of, let's say, the nuclear weapon triggering system and detecting enemy action and creating response even. And that he's quite concerned that this will add more challenges because AI may detect certain issues and recommend certain actions, yet explainable AI doesn't do it in a way that humans can quite get it. So this part of his paper, I think I can see as a challenge. I guess my view is when AI gets that good, it's kind of, in most tasks, AI will get better than people, even if it doesn't explain it that well. So hopefully, it will still prevent disaster scenarios on an average basis. On things like autonomous weapons, I haven't studied it that much, but we obviously don't invest in that in any country. There are agreements being discussed among various countries about banning autonomous weapons. And I think I would like to think most countries are going to discuss and negotiate reasonably on such big existential issues. So just like we managed to avoid nuclear war, hopefully that can be done as well. What really worries me, though, is the non-state actors, because the barrier of AI is not that high. I think terrorists, actually CRISPR is another technology that barrier is not that high. So I would worry a lot more about non-state actors, terrorists, and so on, who use these technologies for harm. hopefully countries, through diplomacy, can work things out.
Eric, did you have something to add there?
Just to build on what Kai-Fu said, there are some folks who are looking at this very carefully. I point you to Max Tegmark and the Future of Life Institute, and there are, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 AI researchers who signed an open letter about autonomous weapons. There's a debate going on the non-state actors. I mean, a video. How many people have seen the video Slaughterbots with the drones? So if you haven't, it's like a 6-minute video, and it's very frightening because it shows how some technologies that are pretty close to what we have today can be combined to have drones with face recognition, with simple weapons, and you can make them in huge numbers very cheaply. That starts becoming something that you could easily be concerned about. So it's something that I'm glad there's some people who are thinking about it and looking at it. Like Kai-Fu, I'm not sure I know what the right answer is, how to do it, except that we need to think really hard about it.
All right, so let's have another question there.
Kai-Fu, this is a question for you, and I'm going to try and pose this in a way that will keep you out of hot water. So here's Google withdrawing from China because they didn't want to be part of the surveillance state, and then there's Beijing with a social credit score and so on and so forth, surveillance state. And here's my out for you to answer this in a safe way that will ensure that you can come back to Stanford and give us another lecture. Let's say you get a contract offer from Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang to develop a surveillance system for $1 billion. What goes through your head? Would you take it? And you understand what I'm driving at.
All right.
It's a pretty easy one. I would, of course, not take it. We don't do contract work, and we actually,
All right, great.
and in our investment, we stay away from doing anything related to weapons and also from intelligence agencies of any country. We just want to build technologies that people want to use.
All right. Let's go with probably the last question, according to Hourglass. Maybe something more uplifting.
It's a quick one.
Hopefully so. Hi, my name is Foster. I'm here actually for a question for Susan related to kind of an economic side of things here. It's been really interesting recently seeing this develop understanding, causal inference about these cause and effect relationships that perhaps go beyond our notions of associativity or good guessing, things that we know exist in our universe and that we could very deterministically trust in. And I guess I'm really interested in your opinions on, back to that graph we've been talking about empathy and compassion versus this idea of like creativity, strategy, and other forms of work. Where do you see our developed understanding and modeling of cause and effect relationships impacting work that perhaps depends on these very strong, perhaps very wide understandings of cause and effect relationships? Things like science or other fields that perhaps demand people to be very, very have a very intuitive understanding of cause and effect relationships, and yet could perhaps be encoded in future algorithms and approaches.
Yeah, so I think that where the technology can be good, and this is really consistent with the themes of Kai-Fu's book, is that when you're making lots of incremental decisions around a world that's fairly stable, increasing, decreasing prices, different messages, different types of training, different, in a very controlled environment, then actually we can get rid of a lot of the guesswork. So we don't have to have creative people thinking about the best headlines. We can sort of test them and so on. But I think what's hard is to try to think about worlds that are very different than the world that we're in. Now, in economic empirical work, we actually try to do that sometimes. Like a big application is like, what happens if two firms merge? And so we do those counterfactual predictions, and they're admitted in evidence in court, and decisions are made about mergers as a result of that. But those are pretty hard, and they rely on a lot of assumptions. And so I guess what I would say is that what I've seen in practice is still that the human is still very important in the loop in terms of sort of defining like what the model is and what the unintended consequences are. And just as like another example, when I worked in the search engine, we did a lot of incremental testing, but the systems that we had to evaluate changes in the search engine were very bad at predicting what would happen if there was something that would have an equilibrium effect or that would have sort of a longer run effect. You know, if advertisers, if you did something that made advertisers spend more, it might look good in a 1-week test, but then they might all exhaust their budgets, and then the prices would fall and the auctions would thin out, and other stuff would happen. And so we actually had many, many examples where we like lost a lot of money. Often I was warning about these things, but it was hard to kind of get the systems, to really be able to respond to kind of the bigger picture effects, the equilibrium effects, the second order effect, of changes. And so I guess I would say that while you could imagine that like an AI could like learn the whole model of the universe, in fact, humans just are a lot better at figuring out what the model should be, and then letting the AI operate within a much more constrained environment. And so actually the role of the human in managing the software, in figuring out what the constraints should be, in figuring out how the short run measures leave out long run effects, all of these types of things are great human skills to have as we go forward, because it's hard to get the human out of the loop in building a system that tries to make decisions.
Well, unfortunately, it looks like our time has run out. I just want to take this moment to thank everyone on this panel today. It's been a very exciting and interesting AI Salon. And I also want to thank everyone here. AI Salon is really a place where we come together to discuss big questions. And so thank you guys all for contributing your questions and to contributing into this discussion. I just want to, again, give a big round of applause to our panelists here today. Thank you so much, everyone.